Hey, my name is Babe. So now that we've learned how to work with the camera and work with time, let's talk a little bit about working back and forth between 11. 11, you can move out the middle would be a good little spot for us to work with. And I thought that maybe we could record the scout running down this little dirt path. So go ahead and hit F11. You'll notice that the scout has disappeared. Even though in the game world we were clearly standing right there, he's gone. That's because for something to show up inside of a shot, it has to be recorded, just like a video camera has to capture somebody to put it onto tape. And so to do that, we're going to go ahead and click the record button and go ahead and click on record. You'll hear 3 beeps, and at the end of the 4th beep, you can go ahead and start running. That means that the tape is rolling. And so let's go ahead and run up to here, and then hit escape when you're done. So you can see here that we're inside the tool mode, and when you hit the space bar, you'll see everything that we just did got recorded into the shot. When we get to the far end over here, we're going to go ahead and stop time with the space bar again, and go down here and click on your shot, and hit the O key to set the out point for that shot. Notice that the sequence has this long strip of black here. You can go and click and drag it, or you can hit Alt-O, which will set the sequence to be the same as the current playhead. Go ahead and zoom in a little bit so you can sort of frame it there. Hit the up arrow to go to the beginning of the shot, and hit F11. Now note that we're all the way on the other side of the map because that's where we were at the end of the last take, so we need to go back and get in places. When we get back to the starting point, you'll see the other scout from our previous take is standing there waiting for us. We can't actually interact with him, kill him, or shoot him because he's actually not there in the game world. He's only a movie puppet. He's being driven by animation channels controlled by the timeline instead of being controlled by game logic. So now that we've created a shot by capturing gameplay, let's talk about how to create a shot from scratch. Okay, so now that we've made a good little action shot, let's go ahead and talk about editing and how to cut up this shot into a sequence. For the most part in the SFM, you're going to want to go ahead and make a master shot that has all the pieces that you need in it before you start cutting it up. This is because it'll save you some time organization-wise to make sure that all the action is there every time you blade or copy the shot. So go ahead and hit the space bar. And somewhere around here where the rocket is passing us, let's go ahead and select the shot in the middle here and hit B for blade. And this This is the most common way to create a new shot. You'll notice they took the entire shot that we had covering the whole sequence and cut it into 2 shots. So the first shot that we had from before is still here, but now it's half as long. And now we have a new shot that starts at that same location. Go ahead and select shot 2 and drag the playhead so it's inside the selected shot. Note that if you click and drag in the viewport right now, it won't do anything because the camera is being controlled by animation curves. We'll talk more about this later. For now, let's go ahead and create a new camera and place it somewhere else in the world. Each time you blade, you're making a copy of the shot. So the camera 1 that we made right before we recorded the scout running is still there. Let's go ahead and set that to be the active camera and move it somewhere else in the world. Click down on the camera button and choose camera 1. Now we can just click and drag in the viewport to move the camera again and maybe fly over here by this soldier so that we can do an over-the-shoulder shot. Maybe mouse wheel in and sort of watch the scouts come through here. So now if we sort of scrub back a little bit and play, you can see that we've got a nice little edit here. And so we can do the same thing again as the scouts leave the shots here. We can go ahead and hit blade again and go into this shot. Now since the active camera is camera 1, we can still move the camera around. Just remember it like this. When you're in the clip editor, you can only use the camera manipulator on static cameras. If you want to modify a moving camera, I'll show you how to do that later in the motion editing tutorial. So let's go ahead and maybe have this shot end when the scouts are coming up and running near us. Now you'll notice at the end of the shot here, the sequence runs out. This is because the blue film strip actually defines the active playback range. We cut it off earlier in the previous tutorial, so I'm going to go ahead and extend the sequence and extend the shot. As I move the mouse over the edit point, you'll note that the cursor changes. And you can click on the end of the shot and just drag it out to extend it. So let's go ahead and move the camera so that the scout kind of runs right over us or something. That'll look pretty good. Let's see what that looks like. So we don't really want all these black frames. So let's go ahead and move the sequence end to the end of the shot. You can either grab the end of it or hit Alt-O. Again, up and down arrows to move between the shots. And there's our little sequence. So let's talk a little bit about working with edits. If you notice, as I move my mouse over the shot, you can see that the cursor changes from editing the end point of this shot to editing a rolling edit between the 2 shots to editing the end point of the following shot. And it's good to think about it in terms of each clip has its own sense of time. So if you make the shot longer, you can actually repeat the same moment over and over again. You can actually see this if you put the camera into the work camera and then play time. As you cross the edit points, time will actually skip. You can also adjust the time window that the shot is looking at by sliding the media under the shot. To do this, hold down Control and Shift, note that the cursor changes, and as I click and drag on the shot, you can see that there's this yellow and black ticker tape that shows up, and as I slide it, you can see that I'm adjusting when the actions happen. So if I were to go through and go to the beginning of the shot here, you can see that there's this rocket, and if I want this shot to start right when the rocket is first fired, I can drag to the right, and now when I hit play, you'll see if I go back, if we watch that edit, you'll see that a rocket gets fired right as we cut. If you just left drag on the shot, you can drag the shot to the beginning to reorder it or drag it to the end to reorder it. You can Control C and Control V to copy and paste a couple shots. You can select those new shots and delete them. If you'd like to move the shot earlier in time and have it maintain its duration, you can hold down Alt and Shift and slide it earlier, which will adjust the edit points on the preceding shot and the shot following. It's also useful when you're sketching in a sequence to expand or contract time, basically make slow motion or high speed shots. So let's go ahead and blade a new shot and do that. Let's move the camera in this shot so we can tell where it begins and ends. Just hold down Control, Alt, and Shift and drag on one of the edit points. Notice that the yellow and black media turns to green and black, and the text on the bottom of the shot actually changes to show you that this time scale is no longer 1.0. 1.0 is normal speed. If you need to reset a shot, you can right-click on it and get a context menu for that shot. Go up to Edit Clip and you can set the clip's name, the color, the overlay text, and one of the items is Set Time Scale. Just set it to 1.0 and tell it whether you'd like it to scale around the start, the middle, or the end of the shot because it needs to change the length of the shot and hit OK. As soon as you do, you'll see that the time scale goes back to 1 and it's a normal speed shot. If I wanted to delete this shot right now, when I hit delete, Notice that it automatically moves the shot afterwards towards the left. Basically, it stops me from being able to create a gap. And now all the gap frames are at the end of the sequence. That's because the SFM is automatically collapsing time towards the start of the sequence. We added this because we were constantly getting black frames between the shots, and we just decided that auto collapse was better. So at this point, I recommend going ahead and recutting your shot up into a couple different kinds of sequences so you can get used to working with the camera and the edits at the same time to really embellish the moment or sort of bring out what you like about your scene. And when you're ready to move on, we'll talk about working with sound and track groups. And don't forget, hit Control S to save your work. So let's talk about working with sound and track groups. To do this, we're going to use a new layout. So let's go up to the window menu and go down to Layout and choose Sound Editing. You can see that all the windows sort of readjusted themselves, and now we have some more track groups below the normal film strip. With sound and track groups. To do this, we're going to use a new layout. So let's go up to the window menu and go down to Layout and choose Sound Edit. Editing. You can see that all the windows sort of readjusted themselves, and now we have some more track groups below the normal film strip. Right-click on the track group that says Music. Choose Add Clip to Track, and this brings up a sound file browser that allows you to choose sounds. So there are a lot of audio files to sort through. So just like the map load dialog, we'll use the filter here to type in a string that will help us search for the sounds that we're looking for. Type in music, and that'll show us only files that have the word music in them. You can quickly browse through the sounds by using the up and down arrows. They'll automatically play as each one gets highlighted. I'm going to go ahead and select this 150 that is pointing to that sound file. So we can right click on it and tell it to show the waveform. We can drag it around just like a normal clip. If we go to the beginning of the sequence and hit I, we can trim it so that it's just basically starting exactly where the sequence starts. And it's a good idea to pay attention to where the start and end of every audio clip is. So I'll just go ahead and hit I and O to trim the start and end. Music is going. We've also got the secondary viewport up here, and it's tied to the work camera. I'll talk about that in just a second. But for right now, there's the sound. And let's go ahead and add a dialogue line here, maybe as the scout's running towards the soldier here. Maybe something along the lines of, I don't know, let's see what we got. So go to the, go ahead and close the music track group and go to the dialogue track group and right click on it and say add clip to track. And this one is going to be, let's pick a domination line. So I think we've got a bunch of scout domination lines.
Today,
so one of these should work.
I am today 400 them $200. I think I'll take Sasha out for a steak dinner tonight.
Maybe
what do you think about that?
Dominate soldier line.
You're a disgrace to the unit. Dismiss.
That sounds great. Okay, so here's a little audio file. If you control middle mouse wheel, you can adjust the height of a clip. If you right click on it and say show waveform, it'll automatically show the waveform, and you can drag it around and place it where you want. So right here where the rocket is going by, let's go ahead and add a sound effect. So go down to the effects track here and right click on the effects track and say add clip to track. And I think we've got some maybe near miss. Looks like we got a bunch of near miss sounds. So go ahead and pick a near miss sound. That sounds good. So even though these are audio clips, they still have a lot of the same hotkeys and functions that you have for video clips. So you can still move them around, you can blade them, you can copy and paste them, and if you hold down Control, Alt, and Shift, you can lower their pitch. It's a good idea to keep an eye on where the audio clips start, because as you drag the shots around, any clip that starts inside that shot will get dragged with it. This is a really great feature for keeping your sounds in sync with the shots, and it lets you adjust edits, delete, or retime without having to worry about things getting out of sync. So I noticed that the audio for these explosions is kind of loud. You'll notice that in the track groups there's nothing in here for explosions, and that's because the audio for the explosions was actually recorded inside of the shot. So to go into a shot, go ahead and double click on the shot, and now you see track groups for each one of the takes that we recorded earlier. Open up the last track group and you can see there's a game sounds section where the explosions are. So if you right click on game sounds and you say set volume, you can set that volume to 0.15. To return to the sequence level, hit the up button, and if we play the movie, the rockets will be a little bit quieter. Dismiss! So this is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and add a fade in and a fade out to some of the shots for a finishing touch. Just right click on the clip and say edit clip, set fade time. So in this case, a 1 second fade time should be fine. The same thing works on audio clips, and you can fade in an audio clip in the same way. Dismiss! By the way, if the audio playback gets annoying while you're editing, there's a mute button on the top right of the timeline. So that's the basics of working with track groups and audio. Next up, let's talk about how to move things around in the scene with manipulators. So now that we've created a shot by capturing gameplay, let's talk about how to create a shot from scratch. To do this, we're going to import an asset from the game library and place it anywhere in the world using a 3D manipulator. Before we begin, let's go ahead and create a new empty shot. So let's go ahead and wave the mouse over the endpoint of the second shot and hold down the Control key. Notice that the cursor changes. If we click and drag the edit to the right, we'll create a gap. Go ahead and right-click on the gap and say Replace with New Clip. Note that it copies the current camera and creates an empty shot. So now that we've got an empty shot, let's go ahead and frame the camera to a new location in the map and do some set dressing. Notice that as we move the camera, both views are moving because they're both looking out of the active camera. So we'll go ahead and set the second view to the work camera, and let's go ahead and turn on the camera frustum so we can see the other camera moving around. So let's try making a reaction shot with a pyro sitting in a wheelbarrow. Let's place the camera on the side right about here, and now we're ready to go ahead and import our wheelbarrow. So let's talk about how to use the animation set editor. It's up here on the left. Since the shots can potentially record hundreds if not hundreds of thousands of things, you need a way to tell the SFM that these small number of things are the things that I actually care about. You sort of need a workbench of sorts. This workbench is called the animation set editor. This is where you're going to select things, adjust sliders, work with presets, copy, paste, delete, and run various rigging animation scripts. If you want to add something to a shot, this is where you're going to import new models into. So let's go ahead and show you how to do that. First, you have to select your shot and make sure the playhead is inside the duration of the shot. Next, you'll see on the upper left-hand side of the animation set editor is a plus button. If you click on this, you can see that there's a menu of operations. This is how to add things to a shot. So go ahead and look for an entry that says Create Animation Set for New Model. Go ahead and click on it to bring up the model browser. This is similar to the sound browser we used in the previous tutorial. This time it selects models. If you just try to scroll through this list, it can be pretty daunting to find the object that you're looking for. Over time, you get used to working with the thousands of objects that make up a video game. If you're making your own custom models, just make sure they're placed inside the models directory and they'll show up in this list. But for right now, go ahead and type wheel, and this will show you only objects that have the word wheel in their name. On the bottom of the list should be the wheelbarrow. Go ahead and select it and click on open. And now you can see that we've got a wheelbarrow in the viewport. And if you look in the animation set editor, there is now a text entry that says wheelbarrow 1. So let's go ahead and talk about how to select it. In the Source Filmmaker, there are two concepts of selection: the object selection and the time selection. But right now we don't have any time selected because we're in the clip editor. To select time, we have to enter into the motion edit mode of the timeline. To do this, you can hit the button on the upper left-hand side of the timeline, or you can hit the tab hotkey. By default, when you enter into the motion edit mode, all of time is selected, and so you should see the entire timeline turn green. So now that we have time selected, let's go ahead and select the object. You can select it in two ways. You can either select it in the animation set editor by clicking on it, or if you want to select it in the viewport, hold down the Control key and wave the mouse over the object. As the mouse moves over the joints inside of an object, you'll see the name of the joint highlighted. If you click on it, it will become selected. If you drag while holding down the Control key, you can also lasso select objects. So now that we have all of time and an object selected, let's talk about using 3D manipulators. We have one for position, one for rotation, and one that can modify position and rotation at the same time, called the screen manipulator. So if you look on the lower left-hand corner of the primary viewport, you can see that there are buttons to switch between each one of these manipulators. Go ahead and click on the translation button. You can see that there's now a transform jack on the object. If you click and drag on the axes of this jack, you can either move it up or down, or if you click on the circle, you can move it in the plane defined by that circle. You'll also see a blue square in the center of the jack. If you click and drag on this, you'll move the object in screen space. So go ahead and work with this until you can get the object positioned over by that barrel. Alright, that looks pretty good. So now let's go ahead and spin the wheelbarrow around so it's facing us. Go ahead and click on the rotation button. And now you can see we have a rotation manipulator. Clicking and dragging on the outer blue ring will rotate the object in screen space. Clicking and dragging on one of the axes will rotate the object on that axis. And if you click and drag on the center, it will allow you to free rotate, kind of like you're grabbing a ball. So go ahead and click on the screen manipulator button now. Using this manipulator is a fast way to move between translating and rotating without having to switch tools. You'll note that there is a yellow square on the inside of the 3D manipulator. This is the translation square. If you click and drag on that, the object will move relative to screen. If you click and drag on the outer orange ring, the object will rotate relative to screen. And if you click and drag in the circular area between the two, the object will free rotate, as if you were clicking and dragging on a ball. On the left-hand side is the pivot handle. You can use this to drag the manipulator off of the object to get more precise rotations and translations. Double-click on it and it'll snap it back onto the object. So before we use this, let's talk briefly about using the floating modification layer. So you may have noticed that the time selection has turned orange. This is because it contains all the modifications that we just did to the wheelbarrow. Go ahead and hit the Enter key. This will apply the current manipulation into the object's motion. Notice that the time selection turned green again, indicating that there is no manipulation present. Click and drag on the screen space manipulator, and notice that the time selection turned orange again. If we hit the Escape key, all of the active manipulations will be discarded, and the object will go back to the state it was before we did the manipulation. Or, if we like all the manipulations and we want to keep them, we can hit the Enter key. So now let's apply all these techniques that we just learned to posing a character. Go ahead and click on the plus button inside the animation set editor again, and choose Create Animation Set for New Model. This time, type the word Pyro. Select the pyro and hit Open. You'll see that the pyro is now floating in front of the camera, just like the wheelbarrow was. Go ahead and put him inside the wheelbarrow using the same techniques that we used earlier. If you want to select a joint and rotate it, hold down the Control key and click on that joint. Repeat this process until you have a pose that you like. I'm going to go ahead and speed up time now so you can watch me do it. So hopefully this gives you an idea about how we build up shots from scratch. So since we added time to our shot, let's go ahead and extend the sequence and review our work.
Dismiss!
Next up, we'll talk about creating animation using time selection. So now let's talk about how to generate motion from scratch in the SFM. All motion editing and animation that you do inside the SFM is based on the idea of what, when, how. What object or controls do you have selected? What time do you have selected? And how are you manipulating it? As you might recall from the earlier tutorial, selection has two components, control selection and time selection. So in this tutorial, we'll go ahead and talk about how to create custom time selections. So for our example, let's go ahead and animate the camera field of view. Maybe do a zoom out shot on the pyro. Select your shot, hit plus, create animation set for existing element, and choose the active camera for the shot. This time, instead of selecting the camera pyro. Example, so in this tutorial, we'll go ahead and talk about how to create custom time selections. So for our example, let's go ahead and animate the camera field of view. Maybe do a zoom out shot on the pyro. Select your shot, hit plus, create animation set for existing element. And choose the active camera for the shot. This time, instead of selecting the camera in the animation set editor, we're going to select a single slider control instead. Go ahead and hit the little plus button next to the camera, and you'll see a group that says all, and hit plus on that. And now you can see that all the controls for the camera are listed. So now we're going to go ahead and select just a single control. Click on Field of View, and you'll see that only one slider has become active in the slider bank. Now all the manipulations and time selections are just being applied to this one control. So just as before, hit the Tab key to enter into the motion editor so we can select some time and manipulate the slider. So since we know we want the camera to pull back from the pyro, let's go ahead and set the starting zoom for the camera. By default, we already have all times selected, so go ahead and drag the slider until you're zoomed all the way in. You'll see that the time selection turns orange, indicating that we have a manipulation present, and go ahead and hit the Enter key to apply this motion. Note that if we were to adjust the time selection before we hit the Enter key, we can create an animated transition. So let's go ahead and do that. Create our zoom out by dragging the field of view slider back to a wide angle lens. Notice that just as before, the time selection turns orange. This is because the time selection now contains a manipulation. We call this a floating modification layer. This is what makes it possible for us to adjust time after we've done a manipulation. It does this by keeping the modification layer floating over the existing motion until we're ready to bake it. So this time, let's adjust the time selection before we hit the Enter key. You may have noticed that there are two vertical zigzag edges on the right and left hand side of the timeline. These are called the infinite time selection handles. If they're present, either all of time before or all of time after is currently selected. So to trim our time selection, all we have to do is click and drag on the infinite time selection handles, and that will detach them from the edge of the window, creating a partial time selection. If you want to reattach them, just drag the time selection back towards the edge of the window, and they'll reattach. You can also hit Ctrl A. If you'd like to move the time selection earlier or later, just click and drag on it and move to the right and left. Because the playhead gets used for a lot of different operations, we tend to use Control Spacebar to review our work. This will play the existing shot once, and then will return the playhead back to its current frame. You'll notice that as the time plays back, when it moves across the edge of the time selection, there's a small hitch in the motion. This is because the time selection is hard. Time plays back. If we want to make it soft across the edge of the time selection, you can go ahead and drag out a fall off, by either clicking and dragging near the edges of the time selection or holding down the Shift mouse wheel.
Note you can click and drag on these fall-off regions to adjust them, and if you want to change the fall-off curve type, you can hit the hotkeys 1, 2, 3, and 4 to change the way that the attack or the decay for the current time selection works.
By the way, you can drag on the top or bottom of a soft tip.
You can
A. Just drag the time selection back towards the edge of the window and they'll reattach. You can also hit Control A. If you'd like to move the time selection earlier or later, just click and drag on it and move to the right and left. Because the playhead gets used for a lot of different operations, we tend to use Control Spacebar to review our work. This will play the existing shot once and then will return the playhead back to its current frame. You'll notice that as the time plays back, when it moves across the edge of the time selection, there's a small hitch in the motion. This is because the time selection is hard. If we want to make a soft time selection, you can go ahead and drag out a fall off by either clicking and dragging near the edges of the time selection or holding down the Shift mouse wheel.
Note you can click and drag on these fall-off regions to adjust them, and if you want to change the fall-off curve type, you can hit the hotkeys 1, 2, 3, and 4 to change the way that the attack or the decay for the current time selection works.
By the way, you can drag on the top or bottom of a soft time selection to move it all at once. To preview animation changes, we recommend holding down the Shift key and waving the mouse to the right and to the left. This is a quick way of reviewing animation without having to constantly readjust the playhead location.
This is important because if the playhead is outside of the time selection, when you do the manipulation, you won't see anything happen. The playhead must always be inside the time selection if you want feedback during the manipulation.
When you're ready to continue, hitting the Enter key or changing selection either on time or on objects will automatically drop the floating modification layer. You can create a new time selection by holding down the Shift key and waving the mouse to the right and to the left until you find the exact frame that you'd like your time selection to start on. Go ahead and click and drag to the right and you'll select a region of time.
Note that doing this automatically drops the floating modification layer and the time selection has turned green.
Now let's talk about using procedural presets to modify an animation. You can think of these as filters that we apply to the motion through the time selection. You can find all the procedural presets in the upper right-hand corner of the animation set editor. Later we'll go into detail about what each one of them does. Go ahead and shift drag to select some time. And in the animation set editor, look for a preset called Jitter. Drag it to 100%. Notice that as we drag the slider, it jitters the existing motion data. You can see that the jitter updates as we adjust the time selection. Go ahead and hit Enter to apply this to the existing motion. Preview the results by holding down the Shift key and moving the mouse. Okay, so this doesn't look good. Let's talk about how to get rid of it. So if you want to delete all of the motion from an object, hit Control A to select all of time. Drag the playhead till the object is in a state that you like, select the object, and then drag the playhead preset to 100%. Notice that the value at the playhead is being copied into the entire duration of the time selection. This means it's also possible to use this with partial time selections, or that you can incrementally apply the playhead preset to get interesting effects. We'll go over this more as it comes up. I'd go ahead and repeat this a couple times until you let it really sink in. When you're ready to review your work, hit Control Spacebar. To recap, you can create motion using 3 steps. Step 1, select an object or a control. Step 2, modify the slider, use presets, or use a manipulator. Step 3, adjust the time selection. And when you're happy with the results, hit the Enter key or change selection to apply the motion to the underlying object. Control, as it comes up, we apply the playhead preset to get interesting effects. We'll go over this more as it comes up. I'd go ahead and repeat this a couple times until you let it really sink in. When you're ready to review your work, hit Control Spacebar. To recap, you can create motion using 3 steps. Step 1, select an object or a control. Step 2, modify the slider, use presets, or use a manipulator. Step 3, adjust the time selection. And when you're happy with the results, hit the Enter key or change selection to apply the motion to the underlying object. When it moves across the edge of the time selection, there's a small hitch in the motion. This is because the time selection is hard. If we want to make a soft time selection, you can go ahead and drag out a fall off by either clicking and dragging near the edges of the time selection or holding down the Shift mouse wheel.
Note you can click and drag on these fall-off regions to adjust them, and if you want to change the fall-off curve type, you can hit the hotkeys 1, 2, 3, and 4 to change the way that the attack or the decay for the current time selection works.
By the way, you can drag on the top or bottom of a soft time selection to move it all at once. To preview animation changes, we recommend playhead back to its current frame. You'll notice that as the time plays back, when it moves across the edge of the time selection, there's a small hitch in the motion. This is because the time selection is hard. If we want to make a soft time selection, you can go ahead and drag out a fall off by either clicking and dragging near the edges of the time selection, or you can get time and they'll reattach. You can drag on it and move to the right and left. Because the playhead gets used for a lot of different operations, just click and attach. You can also hit Control A. If you'd like to select the win all way half or these are there are so this by keeping the tool. Let's go ahead and do that. Create our zoom out by dragging